Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's episode, I have some exciting news about an upcoming event for Talking San Diego. On Tuesday, April 22nd, we'll be welcoming the Lincoln Project's very own Rick Wilson for a sharp, unfiltered deep dive into the state of American politics today, complete with some of the Lincoln Project's unforgettable and devastating, if you ask me, commercials that they've put together to underscore the corruption and inanity of the Trump administration. So expect brutal honesty, dark humor, and zero sugarcoating, and a really great conversation. Rick Wilson has been on top of the political landscape since Trump came down the escalator. For tickets and more information, visit talkingsandiego.net. Welcome to a special episode of Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion on the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. The Trump administration has seemed to be on a war footing with the federal government it now controls. Large numbers of the 2.2 million federal employees have had their work and lives upended through a series of orders and personnel moves that frequently seem completely uninformed and driven by hostility to the very mission of government. At the Department of Justice in particular, the career workforce has had to absorb a series of seismic shockwaves, from the Inauguration Day pardons of the January 6 offenders to the resignations prompted by the command to drop the solid case against Mayor Eric Adams, to the firings of assistant U.S. attorneys at the express direction of the White House, to Trump's brazen and buffoonish speech in the department's Great Hall, to which career staff were not invited. It's hard to imagine what all this feels like at the ground level of government, but it clearly isn't good. We've had anecdotal reports of brutal changes enforced with an iron hand by the new regime, and reactions from formerly proud and content federal employees of stupefaction, fear, anguish, and restiveness. We've absorbed reports of this bombardment in the news, but today's conversation aims to do something different. We wanted to enlist a group of guests best positioned to shine a light on the concrete impact of all these upheavals, the actual mindset of the career staff, and the extent to which the new regime may already have transformed DOJ culture in irreversible ways. To break down what daily work and life are like inside the DOJ, and the degree to which the new regime's loyalty to Trump now permeates the department's mission, we welcome two of the country's leading reporters and a recent DOJ refugee who has started an organization to support her former colleagues. And they are Devlin Barrett. He covers the Justice Department and the FBI for the New York Times. Over 20 years of experience in federal law enforcement reporting. Devlin's worked for the Associated Press, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. He is the author of October Surprise, How the FBI Tried to Save Itself and Crashed an Election. Devlin, very good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Evan Perez, a senior justice correspondent at CNN, covering legal, crime, and national security issues. Before joining CNN, he led Justice Department coverage at the Wall Street Journal, where he, among other things, helped break the story that led to the investigation of former CIA Director David Petraeus. And previously, he spent 12 years in total at the Wall Street Journal. He's been here before to kind of give us the scoop at DOJ. Thanks so much for coming back, Evan.
Thank you.
And Stacey Young was an 18-year veteran litigator at DOJ, and she resigned shortly after President Donald Trump's inauguration and founded the Justice Connection, an organization supporting current and former DOJ employees facing professional and ethical challenges under the new administration. Stacey, really glad to have you, and what an unusual and important job you now have.
Thanks for having me.
So much of this, there's been all kinds of reporting about from the outside, but very little from the inside. I thought we could start by trying to just set the scene as it was. There's been this extremely rapid set of changes in the last 10 weeks. But Stacey, you were there in the very earliest days. I think you left to form Justice Connection the week after the inauguration. But I wanted to get people's sense of just the first few days, what people's expectations were, what first impressions the new guard sort of left, what was the level of anxiety, and but if you can remember what it was like just in the first few days.
There is a real heightened sense of anxiety after the election because we immediately began hearing a lot of very concerning rhetoric about the incoming administration's feelings about and plans for the civil service, particularly civil servants at the Justice Department. We heard, in particular, future members of the administration say that they wanted to put federal employees in trauma. And that's an exact quote. Those are very concerning messages to hear when you are a public servant. So there was a lot of anxiety. There was uncertainty about what exactly the new administration was going to do when it came into power. And I think there are very few people at DOJ who expected the new administration to be as chaotic, undisciplined, to approach DOJ's workforce with such malice, to not follow the norms, the rules, the ethical considerations, the professional considerations when running the Justice Department. And the cuts we've seen have been incredibly destabilizing. There's despair among the workforce. There's concern about people's jobs. People are concerned about their safety due to threats online.
But that's all enhanced. It's worse than the level of anxiety people had on the 23rd, 24th of January, would you say?
I would say for most DOJ employees, yes, it's worse.
I just want to lay down here for the marker from having been at DOJ, and I'm sure Stacey would second this. You are very used to, and the career staff is very used to, changes in administration, Republicans coming in, Democrats coming in, even very different presidents, but really a total consistency of the basic professional tenets and norms. We saw this in Trump 1.0, say, with Sessions. So it's not the change at the top as much as the way they were suggesting they would approach things that I think really rattled people. Did you guys have a chance to do any reporting just at the very top?
Yeah, I mean, look, let me just say this. One of the things that we had a little inkling. I think Devlin and I remember, just for example, in the couple of days before January 20th. One of the things that happens that a lot of people in America don't understand, right? Maybe necessarily the mechanics of the handover of administrations. There's like a delicate dance that happens. The outgoing administration is supposed to help the new administration coming in know like pending matters, especially for Justice Department, right? The idea being that, you might have an ongoing lawsuit that you say might need to be in court for on the 20th or the 21st. And so like there's things that you need to be briefed on, and you need to know coming in. We might be looking at a possible terror attack on the 21st. And so there's basic things that happen in the changeover of administrations that we're used to seeing that just were not happening, right? We reported in all of these. I know me and certainly some of my competitors, we all did stories about how they were refusing to get the FBI involved in the background checks and stuff. Well, that had real world implications, right? And one of the weird things that happened was on January 20th, basically everybody leaves, all the previous administration, all the political appointees leave, but you need one person who has the authority to sign a FISA, a foreign intelligence surveillance warrant, in case there's an emergency. If there is some imminent attack happening and you need something signed, you need someone who has access to a SCIF, a special room where they can look at classified information. There's things like that. And one of the things that we were astounded by was that the new administration was refusing to tell the outgoing administration who was coming in the door to take the keys. Like they just need one human being who was going to be able to come in and sign paperwork if there was an actual real world emergency of the United States.
I never heard that. Wow, that's amazing.
Right. one of the things that happened was, you had Matt Olson, who was like the designated survivor kind of guy. He's the head of the National Security Division. He's leaving, and there was a lot of opaqueness where members of the administration did not know who was coming in, and they wouldn't tell them. And so that was our first indication that, as I call it, season two was not going to be season one. Season two was being written in a completely different script by scriptwriters who had thrown out the book on the previous season of Trump, and we're going to do things completely different.
The previous season of the DOJ, right? Stuart Gerson, Peter Keisler, there's always someone in place.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
And so that was our first indication of how crazy things might be, right? In the end, they did provide someone did step up and do it, but they were guessing, right? Much longer than should have been, because, this doesn't usually happen.
And we're so lucky that there wasn't. I mean, it's already a time you have of heightened sensitivity. Wow.
Right, exactly. Especially because, again, there had been 2 assassination attempts. So everyone was at a heightened sense of concern for his safety and about the continuity of government. And so there was a lot of worry. And so that was our first indication. And of course, the first firings, the first emails came within an hour of Trump taking office, where the first indications to people that they were being reassigned, and it was clear they were being reassigned to things that was intended to help them, to basically push them out the door.
So I will say a couple of things. In that first week, let's just say focus on the first week after inauguration. I think there was a lot of, to Stacey's point, there absolutely was a lot of concern about what this would look like. I think the part that was shocking to the system, to the offices, and to the individuals in DOJ was the speed, to Evan's point. They were just taking high level, very experienced national security people, very experienced, international affairs people, and they were just taking them out of those offices and dumping them into a place that didn't really exist yet. And I think that was sort of the gut check moment where a lot of people first understood this is going to be very, very different than the first Trump administration. They are out to do something very different in this department than they tried to do in the first term. And I think every week since then it has gotten more ferocious and more fast paced in how they try to strip off that top layer of career expertise and take away sort of institutional authority and experience, and eventually replace it with people they have more confidence in, more faith in, who are going to be more quick to do what they say. But I think we're still, to use a housing renovation model, we're still in sort of the gut job part of what they believe they are doing, which is they're ripping down walls.
And down to the studs, right? And so that's where things start. And, we could spend the next 8 hours because there's been a series of seismic shocks since, just to name the most convulsive. Firing of pardon attorney Liz Oyer, the strong-arm dismissal of the Adams case, demolition of important divisions like public integrity, reassignment of department leaders, as you were saying, to these menial or new jobs, Trump's speech in the Great Hall, which still stuns me, and pretty much every move that Ed Martin Jr. has made as head of the DC office. There are a couple that I want to bear down on, but I just, let me ask you first, does one or any of them particularly really stand out?
One that really jumps out at me, and this is a thing that I think people outside the department understandably will not really get the significance of. I think it's really important that last week, the White House fired, the verbiage being on behalf of the president, directly fired a couple of AUSAs, a couple of assistant U.S. attorneys. Those are essentially line prosecutors. Those are people who have civil service protections and were nevertheless fired out of the blue in ways that, as best I can tell, the Justice Department didn't even know those firings were coming. And I think what you have seen since then, and there's a right-wing influencer who played a role in at least one of those firings.
And her name would be?
Laura Loomer.
Yeah.
And that she has played a role now in getting other very senior government people fired who she has branded to the president as disloyal Biden holdovers. And this is, like I said before about they're still ripping out walls. This to me is still part of that process. And that process, like, look, some of this is not unique to the Justice Department, as jarring as it is, as shocking as it is. The first week I remember being in someone's office And another person just came in total tears because they had found out that their entire career, more than a decade, had just been basically thrown on a dumpster, and that they were never going to do what they had devoted their life to doing. And they were just in shock, and they were just weeping uncontrollably. And that initial shock, I think, has now given way to a sort of degree of danger and dread within the department that this is going to be a long, difficult slog for a lot of career lawyers.
Look, I was a U.S. attorney. There were a few career attorneys I would have gladly fired, but it's friggin' impossible. Their so-called accepted employees and their legal protections may be less than others, but their cultural protections, leaving alone the mind-bending feature that it comes from the White House Personnel Office. But the idea of reaching into the career staff really is a third rail. Can you give us the sense within the department of that very strong divide and how stunning it was to reach into the career staff?
I mean, it must be unprecedented. I haven't done historical research on that, but
I think it is. I've tried. Yeah. I can't find one.
Neither could I.
Right. I mean, the structure of the civil service generally is that the vast majority of civil servants are career employees, and they're entitled to civil service protections. And the reason those protections exist is because you want career civil servants to stay. You want the political administration not to be able to remove them and replace them with political loyalists. I mean, you have to remember just the math of this. You have roughly 4,000 political appointees with every administration compared to 2.3 million career civil servants throughout the federal government. And at DOJ specifically, you have about 115 career employees versus a couple hundred political appointees. And the career civil servants are there to serve the country, to serve the Constitution. And I was there for numerous presidential administrations, 7 attorneys general. People might be upset with the president who wins the election, but almost everybody plans to stay in the department despite who's in the White House. You take an oath of loyalty to the Constitution. You don't take an oath of loyalty to the president. So when a White House decides to pick off career employees directly, which is just in complete violation of the civil service laws and regulations, when that starts happening, everybody at the department is wondering, am I going to be next? When is this going to happen to me? And these terminations have been happening without any justification. So everybody is walking on eggshells. Nobody feels like their job is secure. Everybody knows that they could be asked to do something unethical or unprofessional. The whole kind of general mantra you almost hear, it almost feels like a cliche that the law enforced must be enforced without fear or favor. What we're seeing over and over and over again is that the law is being enforced with favor. And people are being put in these, what we're calling hostage situations, where they're being told, you make decisions that are illegal or unethical or unprofessional, or you get fired. And people are resigning for that reason. And people don't want to be put in that position. So in many cases, they're resigning preemptively. There are so many people in the Justice Department now looking for jobs because the climate is so hostile. People are terrified, and they're not working for the Justice Department they're used to, that they know. These are public servants. Our country has a history of respecting public service, and that is not what we're seeing right now. Public servants at DOJ are being viewed as the enemy, and it's hard to stay in a job when you are viewed that way.
Yeah, there's so many resumes on the street. I've talked to private employers who there's just, it's a rough job market now. You pretty much made this clear, but picking up on what Devlin just said too, it's not simply that you serve administration for an administration, but by and large, with a few, important tweaks, you do your same work, you do your same job because there's the same dedication to the mission, at least before that.
Can I just pick up on one quick part of this? Because I think for a lot of people in the public, maybe they're like, you know what? In the private sector, if you work in the private sector, you don't know that your job is going to be there or whatever, So people have lived with this uncertainty for a long time. And so it's hard to get people to understand why it matters. But I'll tell you why it matters. Because even for the sake, if you're a Trump supporter and you have his goals that he wants to accomplish, they're shooting themselves in the foot. And they're doing so repeatedly in ways that is backfiring.
Both feet and both knees, right? I mean, incredible brain drain. Yeah.
Right. And so what I certainly from covering the department from late in the Bush administration throughout, one of the interesting features of it is that obviously the workforce of the Justice Department, they're law and order people by and large, tend to be a little bit more center. They're not left wing as people like to call them. I mean, again, they're like more law and order type people, and they will argue for positions that are based in the law. And so obviously we've had Justice Department people argue in favor of, Guantanamo and detentions there. I mean, throughout history, you can find career employees, career officials of the Justice Department who've stood up to defend lawful things that are being done. So what they've done is by ostracizing and basically not trusting anyone, is they've put themselves on the back foot when it comes to some of these lawsuits, like, for example, the way they handled the dismissal of the Adams case. You could see it playing out in this case related to the Alien Enemies Act, where you were having political people do arguments that they're political appointees who clearly are not used to doing this type of work in court, and they're making mistakes, and they're putting the president's agenda in a bad place. And they're doing that because they didn't trust anybody at DOJ to help them. And they've ostracized and cut out all the people who actually know how to do this stuff. The expertise is gone. They've basically decided we don't need the expertise, and we're going to substitute it with like all these people who are ill-equipped. And so that's one reason why you see them losing on some of these cases, things that they probably could win if they had better lawyers.
And culturally, that's just so huge. I just want to say, when you're there or in a U.S. attorney's office, there are 4, 5, 7 people that everyone goes to because they have the sense of how to do it. Devlin, I want to ask you, because you mentioned you were there last week. So it sounds like you agree with this sense of a very strong projection of absence of trust. And I'm just wondering, like, concretely, how exactly does that come across?
I'll give you one example that I'm probably going to write about pretty soon. If you look at the executive orders that Trump signed related to the law firm, the punishments of law firms he doesn't like, there were 2 emergency hearings held pretty late on a Friday evening, and the government lost both of those hearings. Not a shock, because the legal parameters of those orders are pretty strange, let's say, pretty unusual.
And they never went through OLC, by the way.
Certainly not. But the other thing, to Evan's point, the other thing that is so jarring about, because I was sitting through those hearings, the other thing that was so jarring about those hearings, at one point, Judge Bates, who's been around a long time and knows a thing or two, said to the lawyer arguing for the government, "Why are you the only lawyer here doing this? Why is it just you handling?" And he was, I watched him, he was running from courtroom to courtroom to deal with these hearings, and it was just him. There was no career person sitting next to him, which would normally be the case. It's a former aide to Pam Bondi from Florida. And his answer, amazingly, was, "Well, I was supposed to be in Florida today." And the judge sort of looked down at him over his glass and said, "You get that that's not a great answer, right?" And so I think there's a lot of little things that lawyers certainly would pick up on immediately as to how unusual and problematic for trying to win. Like, if your goal is to try to win a case, this is problematic. If your goal is not to win a case, maybe it's not that problematic for you. But I cannot emphasize enough how, for a regular functioning government lawyer, Stacey knows this, shout out to the litigators for a minute. Like, this is not how this is supposed to work at all. And they were probably always going to lose those arguments in court, but they lost them badly and quickly. And frankly, from a lawyer's point of view, embarrassingly, because of the way they're doing this. Not just what they're doing, but the way.
So I think that's right. The both the embarrassing part, but also so many lawyers are out there. It horrifies me, or just gives me nightmares to think, saying, "I don't know, who said, I don't know," and you're the only guy there to know. I really just want to zero in on this speech for a moment. You guys were probably there. I'm expecting, Stacey, you weren't, because even current career people were not invited unless you got a special, Quisling pass.
I was waiting for my invitation, and it never arrived.
Yeah. I was in the Great Hall for the last big speech of the last administration, where it was just replete with praise for career staff, the lifeblood, etc. Evan, were you there? Can you tell us who were all the people there, since they weren't members of the DOJ? I've never heard of a big address in the Great Hall without them.
Those were mostly the president's invited guests. Usually, I mean, through the years, I've been through more than a decade of these speeches, and they're typically career people form the large part. Obviously, you have some political people who come in, members of Congress and so on, who come for special, like, Attorney General or the president speaking. President Obama came to speak there, when there were some reforms being done in intelligence law. So what was interesting was this was all, the stars, right, of right-wing influencer world.
Around the country, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the president, you could see, he did a shout out to Mike Flynn, to Ken Paxton, members of Congress, people essentially, a lot of people, there was a whole list of people there who were people who had been investigated by the Justice Department. And obviously, we're now in a position because President Trump had won. And so that was one of the most remarkable parts of it. There was just, the whole thing was a production. There was the whole imagery of the Attorney General and the president walking through the Hall of Flags, like the entrance from a runway show on, Fashion Week. It was unusual. And you can also tell that the purpose of the speech, obviously, was this vanquishing moment.
Such a great point. Yeah. I've won. Right.
Right. I won. These people came after me, right? I compared it to The Wire, and the old adage, the adage of you come at the king, you best not miss, right?
Right.
And these people came at the king and they missed. And so that's what Trump was there to tell everybody. Omar was right. It's just exactly what you would expect.
I have to say, as a former DOJ employee, maybe nothing has revolted me as much. I wonder if either of you guys has a sense of, the reaction in the department.
I think the immediate reaction was a lot of people just didn't go to work that day.
Oh, they knew it was coming, and I see.
The building was largely empty all day. And there's a security reason for that, but I think there's also sort of a basic reason that people didn't want to be a part of that. I mean, look, they were playing campaign music, like Trump's playlist was playing in the Great Hall before and after. The music alone, I know it's like a small thing, but just the idea that you're just playing out like Jolene by Dolly Parton or like YMCA, that alone, I think, is such a jarring thing to DOJ lifers.
Why not Wagner? Right, exactly.
And I will say, on a serious note, what that visit showed more than anything else, I think this country has engaged in an 8-year argument that the president is not above the politics, are ultimately subservient to the rule of law. And I think what the last election did was disprove that theory, whether we like it or not, whether anyone likes it or not. What the last election showed is that, in fact, the political system has decided that it is above the rule of law. And I think that is disturbing and disappointing to a lot of DOJ veterans. But I think that's the reality. And I think what Trump was there to say was, this is the reality. I am in charge and you are not. And I think we're going to be coming to grips with that for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually their express position under the law. That's the response to Boasberg or whatever. I won, and who is this single judge?
I was just going to add, the Great Hall, the space where that speech occurred, is just a sacrosanct space. On the stage, there are statues that represent justice, and they put up a curtain covering them. I've never seen anything like that. And what I was hearing is that career employees were told not to even attend work that day in the building, despite the return to work order. To see MAGA hats in that Great Hall, to hear such overtly partisan messaging, is so antithetical to everything the Justice Department stands for. It was appalling. It was a disgrace to the department's history, the notion of the impartiality of law enforcement, and it was hard to see a path forward with respect to the maintenance of the rule of law when it was made clear in that hall by a president who referred to himself as the law enforcer in chief that for the next 4 years, it's hard to see how our nation's laws are going to be enforced in a way that's unbiased and fair. And it was a devastating thing to watch.
All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we peek behind the wine label to see who lays claim to the best Chardonnay, California or Burgundy, France. As we've touched on before, wines from the US are classified by the grape, while French wines are classified by the region. In France, the region of Burgundy produces some of the finest Chardonnays known as white Burgundies, which are almost always made from Chardonnay grapes. To put it simply, when you see a white wine from Burgundy, you know it's a Chardonnay. The cooler weather and cloud cover in Burgundy creates wines that have less of the rich fruit flavors you might find in a California Chardonnay. But what white Burgundies lack in fruitiness, they make up for in highly aromatic and complex flavors that range from tropical notes and crisp green apples to fresh jasmine and exotic spices. And you don't have to book a flight to France to taste them either. Just swing into your local Total Wine and More and ask one of our guides for a tour of our white Burgundies at a great value. Swinging over to California Chardonnays, you'll notice that they tend to be rich, full-bodied whites that have undergone malolactic fermentation and heavier doses of new oak. But that's actually a great thing, because it helps to create a creamy, buttery feel and flavors of butterscotch, vanilla, and ripe tropical fruits with medium acidity, which make for an ideal bottle. So when the mood calls for Chardonnay and you're torn between California and Burgundy, come talk to our guides at Total Wine and More, where it's always easy to meet in the middle and grab a bottle of each.
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine and More for today's A Spirited Debate. Okay, I'd like to try to bear down a little bit more. Devlin, you gave us a flavor of it, but if next Wednesday you were just able to invisibly walk through the department with a camera and see the career staff, etc., are they, a little restive because nobody's giving them any work to do, or are they obsessing about their resume and breaking into sobs? What's your best sense, everyone, of just the exact sort of vibe and feel in 950 Pennsylvania?
Well, I'll tell you this. I mean, I think like anything, right? The human mind sort of like adjusts, right? And there was the sort of like dread, the terror and the fear, the loathing about like what's going to happen to me. And then we went through a period there where a lot of it you heard was defiance. One of the most remarkable parts of this is the way how this has been done, right? Which is to sort of like come in and exact retribution, has managed to turn FBI people, the guys who basically are like the most establishment people ever you've ever met in your life, and has managed to turn some of those people into sort of like revolutionaries, right? Where, there were FBI people sharing memes, that one famous scene of Leo DiCaprio saying, "I'm not going anywhere." That was being shared by FBI people because they were so angry about this prospect that they were going to be fired, thousands of them possibly, for doing what they were supposed to do, what they were ordered to do, which was to enforce the law. To go out and arrest someone because a court has ordered that arrest, and then to have Kash Patel and other people tell you that you're persona non grata because you did your job, it was in some way radicalizing. So what you started seeing somewhat is this rising up of even conservative people in the department who were like, hell no, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to fight. And then, over time, your muscles get tired of being in that place. And so, you go through these cycles. So I don't know if I were to walk on next Wednesday through the hallway, which version of that I might find, because I might think you might find it differently in different offices when you go, but it gives you a sense of how disorienting all of this is. And it's totally disorienting for me as a person who's covered law and the law enforcement for so long, that you have these people who normally are the last people who would want to, rise up against anything, right? They're there to stop that. They're instead like thinking this way. It really gives you a sense of where people are.
I guess I would jump onto that and echo that and just say, I think it varies greatly depending on which office you're talking about. So for example, if you are in, one of the litigation offices, you are more or less insanely busy right now because the administration is doing so many things that require immediate hearings, that require immediate filings. And there are people who are basically in sort of a rubber room situation, like the sanctuary city work, where, for some period of time, they've just been sort of sitting around waiting for instructions. So I think there's a wide variety. I think the one common thread I pick up in a lot of my conversations with people in the building is just a tremendous sense of uncertainty. Government legal work is normally, for long stretches, pretty boring. This is a lot of things. This ain't boring. Depending on what your particular role is in the department, it can be pretty grueling. Again, I think you see little flashes of it with some of the lawyers in court, but I would say the common thread is confusion and uncertainty and worry. The degree to which people are actually doing work or not doing work varies tremendously based on the kind of instructions or frankly, lack of instructions they're getting from some people.
And Stacey, I think if you showed up next week and tried to get in, every alarm in the place would go off and maybe you'd find yourself on a plane. What's the slice of things you're getting as the person most visible out there to try to help people inside?
Yeah, we are talking to people every day. And despite Devlin's mischaracterization of our work as boring, he is right that people's response to what's going on really does depend on where they are.
And some people haven't been given any work to do, right? They don't know exactly what to do.
Sure. I mean, if you're enforcing laws that this administration disagrees with, you are likely doing very little, if anything. And you also may have seen your bosses be fired or transferred permanently to another office. And that's extremely destabilizing, even if you're not immediately worried about the future of your own job. If leadership in your office has been transferred, that message says your work doesn't matter. We don't trust the people who have been leading you for years, in many cases, decades. And it's very difficult to get your work done under those circumstances. But yeah, I mean, some people are working around the clock defending the administration's actions. Obviously, there have been many legal challenges to much of what this administration has done, and DOJ is charged with defending much of it. And other people are sitting around doing very little. And some people are absolutely doubling down and saying, I will not leave this department until I am forced out under any circumstances, whereas others are feeling that they cannot stay and they are looking for a job. So the feelings about what's going on, the plans people are making are really kind of all over the map. But I think there is an almost universal sense that what is happening right now is absolutely out of the ordinary, unacceptable, and contrary to what the department has always been about.
Let me follow up a little without, again, naming names, obviously, but do you have a sense of particular reactions to Pam Bondi versus Todd Blanche versus Emile Beauvais, and now they've just nominated Stanley Woodward to be the associate? Anybody who's a quarter of a good guy, or, are they all sort of lumped together as the not very knowledgeable invading force?
I mean, so far what we've seen from upper leadership is that they're all towing the line. It seems like orders are coming directly from the White House, and that is not what folks at DOJ are used to. Beauvais has been there longer, so a lot of what happened in the first month or so was coming directly from him. So I think most people have just more experience.
And he's a little prosecutorial experience, unlike everybody else.
Right. And he and Deputy Attorney General Blanche were very respected prosecutors in DOJ and SDNY. So there's a lot of surprise about how some of their actions have deviated from the institutional norms. I can't really speak too much to particular reactions to particular leaders in the department, but I think overall the response has been that upper leadership has taken a far different tact to the Justice Department's work and to the independence of the workforce, and has viewed the workforce with less respect than anybody in my memory ever had. I think that the upper leadership seems to view the workforce not as partners, not as the group of people getting the work done, but as enemies. And the threat of investigations into actual civil servants at the department, that's terrifying. And that's a chilling prospect that this may happen in the near future. So yeah, there's a lot of fear and anxiety that I don't see dissipating anytime soon.
Let me ask this concrete question. So there's the 8 a.m. meeting, or there always has been. And in that room, when I was there, it's the Attorney General and all the sort of, maybe 15 people around the table. And just given the way things work, some of them are political appointees and some of them are career. Are they having those meetings? And is any career person present?
They're still doing some of those meetings. And I don't know how much career people are getting involved. I know, for instance, of certain components who do come over and are represented in these meetings. The bigger question is whether are they consulted, are they involved, are they even talked to? And that's a different thing, right? Just because you're there doesn't mean you matter to them, right? And so that's another feature of this. So they are doing some of the regular things. We're still very early. Todd Blanche has just been there now, I think 3 weeks. Bondi's still trying to figure out, exactly how her tenure is going to go. And I think, we don't really have a good sense of their rhythm yet because, the way how this has unfolded has been so unusual. And so, I think check in maybe in another couple of months, we'll see what exactly their rhythm is. Because, right now it's still kind of a little bit by a bit of a fire hose brigade.
The thing that strikes me so far, and this is not unique to this administration, but it is different in this administration, is that process, those morning meetings are much more about a top-down set of marching orders than they are about careers presenting oh, we have this case, we have this issue that we need to wrestle with and decide what our path is going to be, what our targets are going to be. A lot of DOJ, especially on the criminal side, works from sort of a bubbling up from the bottom. By the time something gets to the level of that meeting, you've got recommendations from careers. You've got, sort of a game plan that's sort of presented to you as here's what I think we should do. Here's what the careers think we should do. This is our recommendation. Right now, what's happening is the political leadership is so focused on trying to execute what Trump wants to see, particularly in the immigration space, that I think a lot of what's happening in these meetings is really more of a top-down process. And the other thing I would just point out is that there are a lot of meetings that are still happening on a lower level that are also top-down, meaning the DAG's office is doing a lot of work, as best I can tell, really pushing down policy goals, for example, death penalty related stuff, for example, restoring gun rights to some convicted felons stuff. There is a lot of top-down pressure right now, which again, not unique to this administration, but I think you're seeing a much more intense, faster, and demanding version of it from these folks.
Well, you might know better. I think it is unique to the administration in the sense of, the Norm's been completely crushed about not taking orders from the White House. I've been in a lot of those 8 a.m. meetings. I don't think I've ever heard a sentence beginning with the White House says, the White House wants, et cetera. And I'll bet they do now. This is more by way of speculation to all three of you, just from your sense of the department. It has occurred to me here and in other fields, but especially here, that which I think about the most, that if tomorrow everything just stopped, the damage to date or the changes have been sufficiently pronounced that, and especially at the cultural level, it would take, I don't know, weeks, months, years, really, for the department to be back to the department Stacey left after the first week. I just wonder, from your observation, this isn't a moral judgment thing, but what is your sense of how lasting even these 75 days of changes is for the department?
Oh, I think it'll be very lasting. If everything just kind of slowed down next week, some of the people who have been fired maybe would return to their jobs, maybe not. The sense that DOJ is a place where you can go for a meaningful, steady, dependable career is, I think, a sense a lot of people are not going to have anymore. DOJ has always been an extremely attractive, prestigious place for lawyers and law enforcement officials to join. It's a dream for so many people to be able to represent the United States at the Justice Department. When you're seeing what's happening there right now, when the ideals, the principles that are so longstanding are being just bulldozed, it's not going to give people the sense of confidence, the sense of inspiration, the promise that joining DOJ is going to give them the satisfying experience that so many people have had in the past. So even if you get some of the people back, I see the harm being long lasting and difficult to repair.
I would agree with the idea that I think the change is lasting. I think one of the things that I was always fascinated with Merrick Garland, the previous Attorney General, was his sort of like focus on this idea of restoring norms right after the first Trump administration, and this idea that you could build back what was there before. And one of the things I would often, in having conversations with him, and I would sometimes ask him, what if you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again? I mean, he's fallen and he's shattered into a million pieces, and you are doing your level best to bring it back, but what if you can't, right? And he never had a really good answer to that, right? And I think that is what I think that the era that you guys know and knew, I think that's done. I think it's over. I think there is some new future that is going to be built. It's not going to be the same ever. And I think that if you're the pro-Trump people, that's, of course, that's what you wanted. And I think people who long for that past might be better off trying to figure out what that new thing is, because I think that's just not, it's just never going back.
I would agree with all that, but I would have a weirdly contrarian twist on it, which is, I think this is the culmination of a process that began in 2016. What I sometimes joke with sources is like, we are living in 2016 part 9. And by that, I mean, these outside forces have been working their effect on the Justice Department and the FBI since 2016. And I think the era that people sometimes pine for is sort of the 14 and 15 era. And I don't think you're going back to that, not so much because of what's happened at the Justice Department, although obviously that's important. I think you're not going back to that because of what's happened outside the Justice Department. And I think you don't, to Evan's analogy, I don't think Humpty Dumpty, if you are going to try to recreate that, can be put back together as long as the world around is like this, as long as Congress is the way it is now, as long as the voting public has as many suspicions and demands of the Justice Department and the FBI as it does now. The FBI and the Justice Department, frankly, are not necessarily in a great place when they're on the front page of the paper every day talking about their political cases. I think that is a long-term dangerous position for DOJ to be in, and that is the position it has been in for many years now. So I'm not trying to take away from how significant the changes are right now, but I think of what we're seeing right now as the culmination of that process, not the beginning of some new process.
And I would say real quick on that, I mean, Devlin knows very well too. We can look back at Jim Comey and his press conference as the real moment, right? I mean, all of us think about what's happened recently, but if you look back at that, we've never recovered from that, right? And I don't think people really understood it. I certainly even myself didn't understand it at the time.
There's a great book about it.
Right. There's a great book about it. You should read it. You should look at it. Look, you might have a guy named Devlin. But anyways, I think that's where, I think if you want to look back and see how things have shifted, you start going back to things like that, and you might start getting an answer.
Okay, man, what a fantastic conversation, and the first of I've heard. You'll be maybe happy to know, since the special episode, we're not going to do a Talking 5, but in replacement, I'm going to send a very earnest request to Evan and Devlin, which is if you get the opportunity to just please ask the Attorney General, is there a case, any case, before this administration that she believes was brought without a factual and legal basis? Any case, or a case that had one and was dismissed for political reasons, because I think this slogan gets thrown around all the time. It drives me to distraction, and I think that's what it has to mean. I would really love to hear the answer to that question. Of course, I'm not going to give you notes and marching orders. Evan, Stacey, Devlin, thank you so much for being with us. We can and should, as you say, do it again. It's only been 75 days, hard as that is to believe. Who the hell knows where we'll be and what it'll all look like come September. Thank you so much, Devlin, Evan, and Stacey. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts. And please take a moment to rate and review this show. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. Check us out on Substack now, at Talking Feds Substack, where I am posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week, going live and sharing other exclusive content that breaks down the various threats to constitutional norms and the rule of law. If you're listening to this shortly after it was published, then in a few hours I'll be joined by Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman to talk about where we stand in the crazy tariffs world that seems to be swirling more and more out of control by the week. You can follow us on Twitter at Talking Feds Pod. Talking Feds remains a completely independent production, so it's your support and nothing else that funds all of our franchises. We just couldn't do it without you. And as you may know, Talking Feds has now joined forces with The Contrarian. I'm a founding contributor to this new media venture, which is committed to reviving the diversity of opinion that feels increasingly rare in today's news landscape, where legacy media seems to be tacking toward Trump for business reasons rather than editorial ones. Rest assured, we are still the same scrappy independent podcast you've come to know and trust, but now linked up with an ambitious and vital project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourses. Find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine. Our associate producer is Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McCardle. Rosie Dawn Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahadrenathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers, and production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Sebastian Navarro. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.